more people joining us. So thank you everyone for coming to the Community Engagement Committee meeting, our first one of 2021. I'm excited about the work we started in 2020 and all that we can continue in this year. I'd like to remind us that community engagement is one of Orange County Schools District's 4 priorities with equity overall. And our 4 priorities are equity, literacy, enhanced culture and climate, and community engagement. And our first item is to approve minutes from the November Community Engagement Committee meeting. Mr. Athmore, did you have a chance to review those?
I did.
Can I have a motion to approve them?
Yes, motion to approve.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and we're gonna shift up our schedule a little bit to accommodate people's work schedules. And so before we hear from updates from the board, we're gonna move that back for now and hear from Dr. Keeling and the members of the Equity Task Force who were able to join us this morning. So welcome everybody.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. I do have a request. I asked Ms. Stowe if she could present for me, but I think she has a couple of computers open herself. If I send you the presentation, Ms. Doyle, can you project it? Great. Okay.
Yep.
Great. Quick. Okay, I just sent it to your email. So while you're working on that, I will let the members of the task force introduce themselves. And I'm gonna just look on my screen. Mr. Johnson.
I'm Jason Johnson, Executive Director of Student Support and School Improvement. Good morning.
And Ms. Bunner.
Good morning, everyone. Teresa Bunner, community member and proud mama of 4 former Orange County school students.
And Ms. Cobb.
Good morning. I'm Sharita Cobb, Director for Student Support Services with Orange County Schools.
And Ms. Madison.
Good morning. I'm Vicki Madison, retired school teacher, Orange County Schools. Good morning.
So we have some other members of the team who were unable to attend. Dr. Elstad, Emily Elstad, she is a parent who, for a student at Central, she's also the president of their PTA. Miss Charlene Campbell, who runs a mentoring organization, Beyond Expectations, that a number of our Orange County Schools students are a part of. And Dr. Jocelyn Glacier, she is a professor in the Department of Education at UNC Chapel Hill. She does a lot of work with preparing teachers to know how to teach like culturally relevant curriculum and how to lead their classes with equity and leadership through equity. So that would be the full members of the team for this year. So last February, the Equity Task Force met with the school board. And from that meeting, the school board asked a number of questions, and the task force went back, had conversations around the questions that were asked, and came up with some recommendations for the board and for the district. So Ms. Doyle, I don't know if did you get what I just sent?
I did, Dr. Keeling. Mr. Jones, I don't have the share button available for myself right now.
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
So while we're getting that ready,
Thank you.
what we're going to do today is have a discussion around the recommendations that came out of that meeting that the task force devised. In policy, it says that there will be these joint meetings with the equity task force and the board. And so what we want to get to the point of is having at least 2 of these meetings where in the fall, which this would count as the fall one, we would present some recommendations to the board and present the equity plan. So it would be recommendations for things that the board could work on this year towards equity, as well as the district's equity plan of what the district is going to be working on towards equity this year. And then come back in the spring. Todd, I just got a text from Sandra that says that she doesn't see anyone. I don't know if she's got the wrong link, but I apologize. I forgot about Ms. Sandra Blefko, who is our the district's family coordinator.
Yeah, she's probably in the wrong meeting. Joe, do you mind calling her, giving her that info?
I'm working on it. I'm getting Sandra in.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. And then in the spring, we would come back and the spring would kind of be to see what progress have we all made. So we would revisit the recommendations, the board would have a conversation around here's what we worked on this year, and it would be a chance to look at the equity plan and to see as a district, where did we get this year? So that's kind of the mindset of how the 2 meetings would work. Of course, we're open to the board if there's other suggestions on how the meetings will work, that perfectly fine with us. So I have presented the recommendations to the committee ahead of time so that you had a chance to look at them. We are just going to give like a quick overview of each of them and then allow you time if you had questions or wanted to have further discussion around that. So the first one is, go ahead, Ms. Doyle.
I just want to make sure you could see it. That's all.
Yes, I can. Yeah. So the first recommendation for the board from the Equity Task Force, and again, we met as a team a number of times to discuss these recommendations, is to commit to growing in their knowledge and understanding of equity and how to do equity work and how to lead a district focused on equity. And so the whole premise around this recommendation is that we have to constantly be growing and working not only in our knowledge of equity, but in also how do we lead with equity. So a lot of our leadership cannot look the way that it has always looked, because doing things the way that they've always been done will get us the same outcomes. And the whole point of equity is that we're not okay with our outcomes. We want to change those outcomes. And so in this recommendation, it already says in policy that the board would have an annual full body racial equity training, but the recommendation is that board members go beyond just that training and to have continual trainings on your own. But also we would like to see if we could have maybe at least one joint training with the task force and the board, so that we're all speaking the same language and that we're all on the same page around how we're going to lead equity in this district. We don't have a system in place right now where there's a constant talk with the board around what leading with equity looks like and how to do equity work. Is different for me and like the cabinet, because they constantly get to hear me. Like, I'm not going to say like a clanging cymbal. I'm going to say like a Tibetan bell. Like, they hear me talking about equity. I'm going to say it's a peaceful sound. But there isn't a system in place where we're having these constant conversations with the board. And so one of the things that I've done is to begin to put in the board weekly updates some verbiage around leading with equity, like giving you guys kind of like a little task. Here's something to read. Here's something to reflect on. Here's something to do. So that's my way of trying to keep the conversation in the forefront of your minds and always on the table for you all. So I don't know if you want us to pause in between each of these. I'm guessing that given that some people have to leave, we may just want to go through them quickly. And then if you all have questions and conversation, we can do that after. Is that okay, Ms. Doyle?
Yes, I think that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so the next recommendation I'm going to ask Ms. Cobb. I'm trying to find and make sure I'm calling on the right person before they yell at me and say that's not my question. Ms. Cobb, if you would speak to the next one for us.
So good morning, everyone. Again, the next recommendation, I'm trying to watch it too, Dina. The next recommendation is that the board would keep racial equity at the forefront. Sometimes there's a tendency to divert attention away from race and focus on other equity-related concerns that are easier to navigate through. So we recognize that disparities persist, when race inequity is not acknowledged as a contributing factor to outcomes. So the task force recommends that the Orange County School Board engage in actions that would be like the board should be explicit, international, and vigilant about keeping racial equity at the forefront and as the focus. And the board should examine policies and decisions through a racial equity lens, always examining the intersection of race and other issues of equity.
Thank you, Ms. Cobb. The next one, Dr. Elstad was going to present, but she was unable to join. I really didn't want to be the one to do this one. I wanted a community person to do it. I didn't want to sound like I was being self-serving, but the next recommendation is for the board to allocate the human capital resources and budget to move the equity department forward. And the recommendation around this is, one, it shows, someone said to me when we go through like your leadership training that show me your budget and I'll show you where your heart is, right? And so if equity is the whole basis of the work that we do, then we want to make sure that we're providing the resources so that equity is always moving forward in the district. We all know that I am a department of one, and that it's not just that I'm a department of one, it's that it's over everything that happens within the district. And there wasn't like a previous chief equity officer. Everything that comes out of this department, I am creating it as we go. And so I'm doing the work and creating the work and leading the work all at the same time. And so just being mindful of that, that's how the equity department is working right now. The next one is, let me see who's speaking to that one.
It's me, Dr. Keeling.
Okay, go ahead, Teresa.
So quickly before I go into the next recommendation, I'll just back Dr. Keeling up since she felt like she was being self-serving there, that was indeed a recommendation of the entire committee. And as someone who works on an equity team elsewhere, I think there is a heavy emotional and mental toll in doing this work as well at times. And so I'm just going to put my 2 cents in that I think it's critically important that one person not bear the load of that. So that's my own little soapbox on Dr. Keeling's behalf there. The next recommendation from us, from the Equity Task Force, is that the OCS board actively use Board Policy 1030 equity in education. A lot of time, energy, and work, and multiple stakeholder groups work on that equity in place that would drive equity within the district. Often in equity work, it's the thing we want to think about or talk about after we've developed policies or practices or made decisions, but equity actually needs to be the lens through which we see and do all of our work. So that is why we recommend that the board policy, that the board know and understand and be able to cite that policy, that language is included into conversations and into decision-making processes. And that we ensure, the board ensures always that any policies, procedures, or structures we are developing are aligned with that equity focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. The next one is that the board let the Equity Task Force know when support is needed to advocate for equity. So the task force spoke about, not just giving recommendations to the board, but actually being like a support system for the board. So if there is a need for additional funding and that needs to come from the county commissioners, then the task force wants to be seen as an entity who can advocate to the county commissioners and say, this is the work that we're doing and we need the funding to get it done. So that's just one example, but any other ways that the board would need any support from the task force to advocate, then we would like to be seen as that entity. The next one is to seek, hire, and support a diverse staff, and I will let Mr. Johnson speak to that.
Thank you, Dr. Keeling. Like Dr. Keeling was saying, the recommendation from the task force is for the Orange County School Board to seek to hire, support, and retain staff that's reflective of the diverse student population the district serves. And as you know, with research says it is important for all students to see a diverse staff represented in all the various roles and positions in the district. So the Orange County Schools Equity Task Force recommends the board engage in the following actions. The board should ensure that Orange County School staff demographics mirror the demographics of the Orange County School student population. Also, the board should ensure that there is diversity in staff in various positions across the district. And finally, the board should support efforts to support and retain diverse staff when they are hired by the district.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I see Sandra in the list. Is she able to speak, Todd? I think she's listed as an attendee.
I just promoted her.
Okay, so the next one, Sandra will speak to. Sandra.
Good morning. So for interpretation translations, we are in need of funding for our interpreters in translation, and we actively seek out the voices for our Orange County School families, in particular those that have been historically silenced and who are closest to inequity. Constantly, we reflect on the assets of the work that they are doing in support of equity in Orange County schools. We really need the support, especially for our caring Burmese families. Finding an interpreter is sometimes very hard, and sometimes we cannot find a time that works for the interpreters that we have in the families. Also, it is critical that we are serving all our families. In the past week, we have a meeting for kindergarten orientation, and our interpreter only stayed there for an hour, and the family couldn't hear the presentation. And now it is, I just think that equity in the area, we need to focus more in a way that we can allocate those funds for our families.
Thank you, Sandra. The next one, seeking out voice, is Ms. Madison.
Okay. Okay. Good morning. Okay. Uh-oh. What did I do wrong here? Good morning. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Yes, good morning. It is the recommendation of the Orange County Schools Equity Task Force that the Orange County School Board actively seek out the voice of all Orange County school families, particularly those that have been historically silenced and who are closest to inequity. Equity requires creating a platform for voice and making intentional efforts to hear from the historically silenced diverse voices. The OCS Equity Task Force recommends the OCS board engage in the following actions. The board should continually go out into the community, reach out and engage in ongoing conversations with community members, particularly those that have been historically silenced and who are closest to inequity. The board should make known to the public the efforts they are making to seek out historically silenced and who are closest to inequity. The board should constantly assess whose voice has weight and whose voice is missing, and actively seek out the voices of those who have been pushed to the margins and create a safe, inclusive environment in board meetings for those voices to be heard. The board should encourage, support, and hold accountable all OCS employees to seek out diverse perspectives in decision making. Board members should get out to all parts of the district and not stay within certain pockets of the district population. The board should ensure that stakeholders are able to speak their truth, not assume that the most vocable voices are representative of all. And the board should make decisions based on input from the diversity of stakeholder voice. Now, I know Dr. Keeling, you said you wanted to go to the end before we wanted to make other comments, or could I make?
Yes, no, you can speak to that, yes.
Okay, and I just happened to get this one, but I hadn't heard of the Community Engagement Committee before. And so I said I would go back and kind of look to see what these meetings were like. And it just so happened that I made some notes here. So if I'm looking here, I went back to the November 13th meeting, and it was about the family liaisons. It was some other things, but this is what really stuck out in my head. And it was almost baffling to me when you had 7 positions, and of the 7 positions, I think it was 3 that were filled, and Miss Blefko, it was almost like she was pleading that she needed a Black liaison to go out in the community because they were not showing up. And I understand how you don't want to replace something that you've already allocated funds for, but I want to make sure that her request, it was like her and Dr. Keeling. Now, I'm just an outsider looking in, but it was almost like they were pleading and almost begging that they needed someone. But I kind of felt on the inside that they weren't really heard. Maybe I'm taking this to the wrong level. I don't know. But I need to know, was that just not put on a list on the back burner when they said that they really needed a Black person to serve as a community liaison? And these are some of the things that I heard. This was just sitting back and just looking. liaison should be representative of the community. I think that's what Ms. Blefko said. And then Dr. Keeling, when she came on, she said that some of the talk that she's heard, and I've heard this talk too, that pitting African Americans against Latinos, and it's a trust gap. Now, being a former educator, well, once an educator, always an educator, but being with Orange County Schools, if I had been a person, just a lay person, that just happened to come upon this meeting, and I had heard that a request for a liaison for me as a Black person, and you didn't feel like you were really heard, and it was sort of put on the back burner. Maybe that was just my perspective of it, but I'll be honest with you. Orange County has been known really for doing that. If it's a program that's working or something that's happened, and I won't even go into that when I worked at Pathways, because I feel like I am the clanging cymbal sometimes. So I want to calm it down a little bit. But if it's a program out there and it's working, sometimes it just fizzles out. It just goes away. When I was working at Pathways with Connie Brimble, we had a beautiful program going on out there where all of the Black parents were coming out, and it was testing and all of that. And some of you may have heard this before, but members of the white community complained because they couldn't join in, and they were saying that it was unequal. Whatever we have for the Blacks should be for the Blacks. Should be inclusive of all of them. And the program was dropped. And it was something that was working. It was working. And I see this community liaison piece really working. But you need somebody with color. Now, definitely, I'm not asking you to change anything for the 7, but I'm pleading that you find funds for someone who looks like us to communicate with these families and have separate workshops for them some kind of way. And that's just what I saw as an outside person looking in as to how that message from that meeting would have sort of been conveyed to somebody else just peeking in on the meeting. That was just sort of my perception of it. And I never really saw a conclusion as to how this other person might be hired or funds might be gotten. But I just want to say, don't forget that person. They've asked for that person. They see that it is a really big need for that person. So don't just let it be put on the back burner. I'm done.
Thank you, Ms. Madison. And then the last recommendation Dr. Glacier was going to speak to, which she was unable to join us this morning. And that is for the board to constantly reflect on and assess the work they're doing in support of equity in Orange County schools. And the task force listed some questions, and these are not the only questions that the board can ask of themselves. But the purpose of this is to make sure that the work that we're doing is not just performative, that we're not doing things that makes it look like it's equity, but it's not getting us any closer to the outcomes. It's not changing the narratives, the experiences for students and for families is not changing. It may look good, but it's not accomplishing the work that we're trying to accomplish. And so to just be constantly reflective about what do we need to do differently, as well as, like Ms. Madison just said, what are we doing that's working? So she mentioned that the family liaisons are something that we're doing that's working. And so we want to make sure that we give ourselves the recognition for that, but to also reflect on those areas where we need to do some more work. So those are the recommendations. I will pause there and open the floor to the committee if they have any questions for the Equity Task Force while they're all still available.
Thank you, everyone who spoke up today, and thank you, Ms. Madison, for your charge as well. Does anyone from the committee have comments or questions for Dr. Keeling or the Equity Task Force members?
Carrie, I do.
Oh, yeah, speak up. I can't see everybody right now.
Okay, no problem. So first of all, I wanted to thank Dr. Keeling and the committee for the hard work they're doing. I know it's not easy, especially during COVID. These are not easy conversations. So I just wanted to thank the committee and everybody that's working on that, including our staff. This is so important and necessary for us to make changes and be aware. The first question I had is, Dr. Keeling, you talked about everybody that's on the committee. I know we really wanted to put students in the committee. Have we been able to do that? Or how, I guess the general question I have is kind of a two-part question, is whether they're there or not, how are we also getting the students? Because to me, the students give us the litmus test of what's really going on the day-to-day, right? You know, there's a community aspect, there's a student aspect, there's so many parts of this, and just curious on your perspective on those.
Yes, you're so right. Thank you, Mr. Atherton. And so the second part of this presentation, which we're going to put that at the end, is the next steps for the task force, because the current task force does not have students on there. And so the work that I do is through those student equity teams, which I'm still working on developing and making sure that that they are representational and that they're getting all of the different student voices. I'm also working with the advisors and asking them to not just have the students to just be a forum to say, here are the things that we think need to be changed and here are our recommendations. Like, I would like to see us educate them on how to be advocates. And so when they write letters to the board, that they've really thought about what is the charge? Like, what is it that I'm asking for the board to do? What is it that I'm asking for the superintendent to do? Not just what is it that I'd like to see today, but like, how, again, when I'm asking for them to do something, how is that going to get us closer to the outcomes that we want to see in our school and in the district? So that's kind of the work that's happening on the side in the student equity teams. And then later we will talk to the next steps for the task force, which will be to include students. Yes.
Perfect. I just had a couple more, if that's okay, Carrie, unless somebody else has questions. I'm willing to step back if Ms. Moore has questions.
Ms. Moore, do you have questions at this time?
No questions, but I do just want to thank everyone on the equity team for everything that you're doing for our district. I hope in the very near future that we could work together. It seems like you have a very good roadmap to develop some programs that are needed across the district. So I thank you in advance for your support, and I thank you again for everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moore.
All right. So the next question I had was, you know, we talked about advocating at the county level, and I that's very important. And I think also if we can partner with Chapel Hill and come forward as an Orange County community on equity initiatives, we will be successful, right? Especially as we saw when we first initiated the training at both districts and leveraging that and making sure we're consistent. So I just want to, I know it's not directly in here, but I just want to say it out loud that I think partnering, especially given this is not a unique issue to us, that doing that, I believe we will be more successful with the county on things that we can share. Now, I do agree that we're going to have things that are specific to Orange County, and we should go after them no matter what. But I think on some of the larger ones, we can partner and make sure we can get, you know, additional funding beyond, you know, per pupil and things like that to help us.
Thank you, Mr. Atherton.
The last one I'll mention, well, there's really two left. One is I'm very, very disappointed to hear from Ms. Blefko about 1 hour of interpretation services, that to me is just not acceptable. I won't speak for the full board, but I'm highly confident none of us would have an issue with allocating funds to appropriately ensure people can understand what's going on in our district. So I, just want to say I'm kind of disappointed to hear that and hope that can be addressed. And that's just a unique issue, not a systemic issue across our schools for providing that service. And the last one I just wanted to mention is Ms. Madison, thank you so much for bringing that up. I don't, that meeting was, definitely a discussion about many things, and you're right. One of the worst things any of us can do is delay needs in the community, and we definitely want to make sure we are addressing our community and people have a voice in it. And I do want to also extend that, the board's going to need some help, and how do we get out in some of the communities that we're not intrusive, right? Because just showing up is not the same thing as being invited or knowing what's appropriate. And, all of us will have to get out of our comfort zone, which is needed. So I just want to put that out there, that it would be very helpful as well to, recommend how we should engage in some of these, getting out in the community where it's appropriate, where it's not going to feel intrusive to any of our community.
Carrie, I know I'm not on the committee, but it's related to that point.
Yes. Go ahead, Ms. Miley.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't sure if, okay. This point around this second bullet here, seeking out the voices of all families, especially those who've been historically silenced, the point that Ms. Madison brought up. What I'm thinking is, I think that the board understands how important that is. And I think the district leadership also understands how important that is, but it's a challenge, right? It's been a longstanding challenge. And so there are certain things we're trying to do, like concrete things like this topic about having some like board office hours monthly, right? As like a new thing to try. What's striking me is like, we have some specific strategies that we are considering. And I think it would be really helpful to find out if there are, as we're doing things in this, as the Community Engagement Committee is doing things, can we get suggestions, feedback, input from the Equity Task Force about, I mean, we can try to put our own lens on it, but there's like plenty we're not going to see, in terms of like, what are things we're not thinking of? What are some strategies we're not thinking of, or additional things we should be doing in order to make progress on getting the voices of all families heard. Yeah, so I guess that was a long way of saying, I just think like this committee was formed this year to figure out how to tackle things like that second bullet and the first, I mean, all of these bullets. And once it gets down to the nitty gritty of how, it seems like a place where I personally would just really appreciate input from the Equity Task Force.
Yes, so let me ask the committee real quick. So I know we have more we're scrambling the schedule a little bit, which is fine to do, and I just don't want to make the decision by myself. And Miss Madison, I hope if you're able to stay today, one of the conversations we're going to have has to do with a outreach model that Durham Public School. So Mr. Atherton and Ms. Moore, do you think we should continue with this conversation on the Equity Task Force? And I know Ms. Moore has to leave. Or would you rather we keep spending time right now rather than breaking it into two parts and going to the end? I'll defer to you two.
I'll refer to Ms. Moore since she has to leave. What would be the most valuable for her to participate in before she has to leave?
If it's okay, if we can go to the presentation,
Okay.
and I hope that's okay with everybody.
Good with me.
Okay, that's great. So we're going to pause, and I know I want to invite all board members to give feedback to the Equity Task Force as well, but I think we're going to discuss right now a model out of something that's been working in Durham Public Schools. So I'm going to change what I'm sharing here. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, so with some of these concerns that we're discussing in mind, a number of us were on a presentation by the Village of Wisdom out of Durham, and they had a parent research group that presented findings among their among African American students during the early months of school closures, and it was a really excellent presentation that a number of us attended. And I reached out to Durham Public Schools board member Javonia Lewis, who's a new board member like myself, and she this is called nonprofit she founded, Empowered Parents and Community, to support the work of PAC, which is Parents of African American Children. And PAC is a model that she started several years ago. And so it started when there was a state identified focus school that underwent a drastic shift in student population once it became a magnet school in the early 2000s. As the school became increasingly white, the staff was virtually all white with no lead Black teachers. And parents of Black children began to feel that their children experienced implicit bias and discipline responses, greater obstacles to be AIG identified. And so these parents, led by Ms. Lewis, began to organize, realizing how important it was, for example, to seek out participation from other parents of Black children, and to have their voices heard in groups like the schools, the SIT, the school improvement teams, and the PTA. And she used the phrase, Ms. Lewis called it demystifying the PTA for parents. So this is the mission statement of PAC. And I'm sharing this as a model for us to consider as a community, and also a resource because Ms. Lewis does consulting on this. So this is their mission: to dismantle systemic racial inequities through collective organizing and intentional engagement of African American parents and communities, and the advocacy piece. So it's a parent advocacy group in Durham Public Schools that advocates at the level of their family engagement department, their equity affairs department, through contracts with individual schools, and at the PTA level. One thing I learned from Ms. Lewis is that under NCPTA guidelines, PTAs can and perhaps should have an advocacy arm. So sometimes PAC has functioned in that space. And by that, I mean, if there weren't like officer spots available for parents who are looking to get involved in the PTA, they basically created new spots for the advocacy arm. Okay, so a lot of these issues, the need to be more student-centered, racial equity and culturally affirming is what we've been discussing in Orange County schools as well, through the work of the Equity Task Force and at the district level. And it seems we have not had the same grassroots parent activity across schools. I know that we don't have something that's functioning similarly in schools that I'm aware of that's parent-led. Right. So these are some of the specific topics that they were trying to address. Similar issues with staff diversity, and curriculum. And I think, Ms. Moore, please jump in. I know we've talked about some shared experiences, so please feel free to jump in if you have comments like the adequate resources or other things.
One of the former schools I was at in Wayne County, they did have a advocacy group outside of PTA. They got together, they formed educational partnerships with State Employees Credit Union. The credit union donated lots of copy paper, pencils, different things like that that the school needed. They also set a time, they would come out on Fridays and they would read to our children age-appropriate books. Also, we made an educational partnership with Sam's Club. Sam's partnered with us. They would come out and basically keep like all the flowers. The school was like a beautification project. So that was a partnership. They also developed a diversity and inclusion group because we had so many children with different backgrounds. So they did advocacy for that. And they ended up making it like a local chapter group. So that was very beneficial. They're still doing that same program right now. So I think that this would be a good idea to bring this to our district, working with the Equity Task Force to make it specific for our district and our needs. But I think this is a good idea.
Thank you. So this is an example of how one of the PAC groups, and they're in, I think, about 13 different schools in Durham Public Schools, of what it might look like at an elementary school that had an active PAC group. So my understanding is that the school focus letter, it's almost like there was a failure there to, the original goal was to serve the kids whose needs were not being met, and that ended up not happening. So it was sort of like representing the charge of that letter, inviting guest speakers, Bump the Triangle is a nonprofit youth organization focused on the arts, and inviting that group in. The Village of Wisdom Black Genius Profiles, that same group that presented to us. Welcome Back Latinx of the current events at the time, specifically following the Day Without Immigrants in 2017. And this is one of their anti-racist education training programs. The Lunch Bunch and the Reading Group were in response to parents feeling kids were unfairly not identified for AIG and wanting to provide more enrichment opportunities for their children in a culturally responsive way. Similarly, at a middle or high school level, this is the type of impact that PAC made. They had really great turnout. We're going to see some more of those numbers, but really great turnout from and engagement from parents in the community. It also created, I know that Dr. Keeling has helped support a Black student union at Cedar Ridge, and so these schools also kind of happened in the opposite direction, the formation of Black student unions. Okay, so this is a summary of the efforts that they did and sort of the and at this point, 1/3 of the schools in Durham Public Schools have the active PAC group. So a lot of it had to do with navigating, like, again, like why, the PTAs are historically so exclusive, that a history of being exclusively white. And so helping parents navigate and advocate and get those seats at the table. This group is called Cobbled Coalition of Black and Brown Leaders in Education. These are PAC parents who completed the leadership training that will be mentioned here shortly, including the white mom of a Black child there. And Javonia Lewis is on the end here on the right. So this is what their calendar of events from October 2020 through June 21 looks like, showing monthly PAC meetings as well as leadership empowerment training conferences. and they're hoping to have an outing later this spring. So in the 2018 and 2019 school year, this is something that we've talked about, I guess it was at our last community engagement meeting, just trying to create engagement opportunities where we're engaging with the African American community in our district, and because of that broken trust, not having the participation that we hope for. And so with this group, starting with the parents, just having this great turnout with 60 parents turning out for a Black Empowerment workshop. I just want to highlight this point. So support from the district to pilot a collaborative initiative with Voices of Wisdom, We Are, and then EPIC, which is this nonprofit here. All right. And then this is for this past school year, 19 to 20, as many as 75 parents showing up for one of their workshops. And then that was Javania Lewis, the last point. She's the Black parent leader who ran for school board and won. So she expressed, just one last point, she expressed that that on behalf of, that she's really excited about the idea if there's interest in our district, if there's this interest among our board to have her come, she is available to consult with the broader school leadership or within specific schools to begin the process of parent recruitment. And she's provided consultation with other districts. She would love to have collaboration with our neighboring counties. So, Ms. Moore, do you have more comments about this before we just open it up to everyone else for feedback?
Yeah, the only other thing I have, I do want to say with that particular group in Wayne County, the diversity and inclusion piece of it, it did increase parent participation with PTA meetings. Sometimes parents would just get together, they would just have like coffee workshops and just kind of discuss things that, you know, were important to them. And it reestablished trust within the district. So it bridged that gap that was there.
Anyone else with feedback, please jump in since I'm screen sharing, I can't see very well.
Carrie, it's make a couple comments if I could. One is what I find interesting about the EPIC program that I'm not hearing in ours is that it's very school-based as opposed to district-based. And I think it's really important to build this power in the schools, not create a kind of a superstructure over it. I think, and when I think of that, you know, I think we've got some really good things that are already happening, like Mount Bright and Central have a partnership. I think Mount Zion is tied into a bunch of schools, and I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that New Hope is very tightly tied into the Hispanic community that it's serving. I don't know if Holy Family has done anything. My guess is they'd be interested. I can go back to the other presentation, but that's a big deal for me. As I get a little worried about building a new organization than driving equity or encouraging equity, better word, encouraging equity and community, extending the community building within our schools and extending the resources in our schools.
Yeah, and I think, I think the work that Dr. Keeling is leading is excellent, and like have to have the overarching policy and structure. But I do feel like we still have that trust gap, and I don't know what we need to do to change it. And I realize that not, a grassroots effort that works in one place might not translate well to ours. But what's your reaction, Dr. Keeling?
So I agree that this is very grassroots and school-based, and it is exactly what has to happen. There are things that we have to do at the district level, and then there are things that need to happen within schools. And so I made a note about Dr. Elstad, who is the president of the PTA, as I stated, at Central, and seeing if we can work through her with this and making some connections there. I think at our higher level, I'm sorry, not higher, at this district level, we have to, when we talk about the trust gap, we have to always remember like the historical foundation of how did we get here. Like when you're addressing an equity issue, you can't just address that outcome. You have to figure out like what led to that. And so talking to like the faith-based community, they started telling us, here are the things that have led to why Black parents don't show up for stuff. And Miss Madison probably would even know even more about it. But even, I was recently watching a documentary on Martin Luther King's the assassination tapes. And so the days leading up to his assassination and the protests in Memphis and the response to the peaceful protests. And there was a part there from the president. And he said in his tapes that because of the response that happened in Memphis, in Durham and in DC, they had taken to the streets to protest, like in peaceful protest. So Durham has a history of fighting against segregation and, pushing for civil rights. Orange County has like kind of an opposite history, right? If we're going to be honest, Orange County has a history of segregation. We're not so far removed. We actually have staff in our district who attended while it was segregated. And so I think when we talk about the work that we do here, we have to talk about how do we get at those historical roots? Like, how do we begin to do that work? And I think what you've just presented is great. And it's something that we need to at the schools and say they got to kind of do some work themselves, because schools also have to figure out why don't parents, Black parents or Latino parents show up. I don't know that there's a huge African-American presence at PTA and New Hope. I think it's more white and Latino. So even there, they have some gaps, right? So I that would be my thoughts, like how the different levels work.
Yeah, I think sometimes it can maybe be messy, but it has to be additive. Like it has to be policy and broad, and then it has to be things going in multiple directions. Bonnie, and then anyone after Bonnie, please feel free to speak up.
Yeah, I just want to, and Dina, I don't know if you've gone back and looked at it, but in the past, we've talked about this before, the district used to host minority summits, and this was African-American families. It worked really, the families were really happy with it. It was their chance to raise their voice in a comfortable setting. They were discontinued. I don't know why, but I wondered, and I remember when we spoke about the family liaisons, the question was, would that be a better approach to return to something like that? I also want to remind us, before the holidays, a Central parent, and I don't want to name names, told us about disparities in AIG with a Central student who went from Central to Cameron Park, and they got double the AIG access. And at some point, we still haven't done anything about that. That's unacceptable to me. I mean, I'm going to get mad as I talk about it. That's unacceptable. So we could sit here and talk about all this stuff, but at the end of the day, an African-American parent came to us and said, this is a problem, and in COVID, my student especially is not getting the support they need, and AIG is especially important, and we haven't responded. So I'm gonna stop now.
I just want to speak to that, Ms. Hauser. I personally called that parent after getting that email. The email was not initially sent to me, but she then ended up sending me the email, and I spoke to her. And I had weekly meetings with the C&I department around equity, and said we have to develop a plan, which we did. And I believe that Dr. Felder spoke to her as well, and that it was heading into the holidays, and that there was going to be some follow-up after the holidays. And she said she was fine with that. But I also asked her, why aren't African American families participating more? Why aren't Black parents participating more? And she said much of the same thing that everyone is saying. And so this is not, at this point, this is not like we don't know what's happening. It's more of, what are we going to do about it? You know, and her thing is, when I walk through the door of a school and I'm disrespected, then that's a problem, right? I'm not going to come and be a part of. So, yes.
Dana, I appreciate that. And I'm familiar with those conversations. And I really appreciate that. Have we solved it? Have we provided equal access to AIG at Central? Have we solved it? Or have we just talked about it?
I can respond to that. We are working on that. We are working. Part of it is the fact that we are still trying to fill a position that has been vacant. We've had a very difficult time filling an AIG position. So we have a vacancy issue, but we are working on additional workarounds. So we are working on it.
Good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's go on a little bit. Ms. Stevens, did I see your hand up? No,
you did not. But let me say that this is not the first time that we've had a concern with a Black parent whose child needed AIG services at Central. Kimberly Parker ended up going to Central. So it has happened. It happened end of last year, and it happened a couple of years ago. And thank you, Dr. Felder. I certainly hope that we can fix this, because has been an ongoing problem.
Yeah. Okay. And I have reached out to Emily Elstad, by the way, Dr. Keeling. We were all kind of thinking on the same page, and I know Ms. Moore was also thinking about Central. We talked about that. And so there is some enthusiasm to pursue this. Other people have comments?
This is Teresa Bunner. So if I could just, when we think about, should this be a district level initiative or school level initiative, I would invite us to consider that it's not an either or, but needs to be a both and, because if we put the onus only on the schools and we don't have avenues at the district level, then we create inequities, because we know that not every school and school staff has the same capacity to do some of this work. So I just invite us to consider that it's an either or, but that we need a both and that, yes, it needs to be at the school level. That's where it's, highly effective, but we also need to have some pathways and resources and guidelines in place at a district level so that we ensure that African-American Black families at one school don't have greater access than they do at another school, which can sometimes happen when we merely put the onus on the individual entities.
Great, thank you for that. I don't know, Ms. Madison, if you want to,
Yeah.
I'm just going to, someone, go ahead.
It's like it's the same conversation. I was sitting here, my brain just went back. And a lot of the board members are new, but me even presenting about my granddaughter not getting her services, and you just had to go and just fight, and she's doing just fine now. But it just shouldn't be, it should not be that way. A lot of what is being said right now, and we say like back in history, this is the same conversation we have been having for so long. And what my hope is that we see some results, that it just don't be put on the table, and people just get kind of pacified. Because, I hear things out in the community and I'm like, okay, we're working on it and we're trying. It's like I've been on the equity committee ever since we started the equity committee. And it's the same questions coming through over and over again. It's just overwhelming for me to sit here, to be going through this conversation over and over and over. And I just pray, it's my prayer that finally, well, some parents are speaking up, but what about those parents who don't speak up and don't know how to speak up? That's why it's so important with this community, with the family liaisons. Yes, they like to see people that look like them. You just can't, when you've been hurt so many times, you still got that stigma kind of in the back of your mind. Oh, it's going to be just like with the minority summits were working. They were working. And I was thinking, like, in the back of my mind, like, our sorority, when we come out and we pull things together, like the HBCU fair, and we have lots of other things, and they come out because that community comes out because they're comfortable and we follow through with what we say we're going to do. If we say we're going to do it, we follow through. But a lot of times things, they just, and I'm so glad that that minority summit was brought up, because I had kind of forgotten about it. That was something that was working, and it just kind of fizzled out and just don't know what happened. So I'm happy to see that we're having this conversation, and it's frank, and you can just kind of speak your piece. But it's a lot of people out there that are not speaking their piece because they're just tired. And it's like that parent, whoever that parent was, about the child and the difference in the services. She should not have had to have contacted so many people before she got some type of answer. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am.
That shouldn't have had to have gone through a thread like that. And see, and what it does, it builds up that animosity. It builds it up. Oh, here I go again. Let me finally get somebody that will listen to me because my child needs these services. So let's just move on with it. But we still have to look back historically, just like you said, to see what's going on in people's minds. And when these things are put into place, you're going to have naysayers from other groups. Don't let the naysayers come and just wipe it away like sometimes it's been done in the past. So thank you for listening.
Ms. Madison, I don't know if you're able to, in this context, but if you're able to explain, because you know my kids were at Pathways as well, and I'm not aware of the program you talked about that went away. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
It was so great. And Connie Brummer was just epic in this. I went to Connie and I said, Connie, every time a teacher would sit in a staff meeting, and at the beginning of the year, they would always show those results. And the African-American teachers were always behind. So Connie came to me, she said, Miss Madison, what can we do? I said, we need a focus group. We've got to get these parents in here, but just these parents. We've got to, parents getting off work. I said, we've got to have childcare. We've got to have them dinner because they're just getting off from work. Don't let them go home. Don't let the parents go home because they'd be thinking dinner and all. Just let them come back. And we can have teachers in there. They can help them with the kids with the homework or whatever. And we can just talk to the parents. We had a media center full of parents and it was going on and it was so great. And then people started to complain because we were having speakers coming in. Why can't we get that same information? You don't have anything that's special for us to come in. Connie tried to explain. Here is the data showing that this is the group that we need to help, that need the extra help. The parents were so happy. But believe it or not, then some teachers started saying, I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair that you're just focusing on this group and not doing anything with another parent group. And it just kind of fizzled out. I can't even remember when it stopped, but it just stopped. Something where we had the parents coming in, and it was great, and it just stopped. And I tell you what, I was tired. I just got tired. I didn't even go back. My fight was over. You can only have so much fight in you when you've got so much going against you. But it was great. So if anybody see Connie or anything, and you can ask her about it, it was great. And even at Central Elementary now, when I took a maternity position over there, when their PTA have something, I mean, that cafeteria was full when they would have all the people and all the speakers. And I think it's because it's consistent there. It's consistent. It's consistency. Don't let it fade out. You just have to be consistent with it. So
thank you so much.
I hope that I haven't just like gone on a rampage or a rant.
Oh, no.
If I did, I just apologize. But this comes just from way back of just the same thing kind of happening over and over again. But that minority summit, it worked. People came out to that when that was happening. So I don't know what happened. I don't know.
Okay, thank you so much. Hold on a minute, Bonnie.
Okay, sure.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to understand, is the program at Pathways, was that part of the Minority Summit, or is that different?
It was different. It was not part of the Minority Summit. It was different because we, as the minority group at Pathways of teachers that were out there, we were like, we are tired of sitting up in these faculty meetings, and every time it's the same old data where our kids are falling behind and nothing is not addressed. So we decided to do something at a school level, and it was working. It was really working. And it's gonna have to happen like within the schools and at a school. I really like that school level, rather, because that's where it is. It's right there within the schools. And I know that people even on this committee, when you see that data flashed up there, it may not affect you like it would affect me, because I'm thinking about my kids, I'm thinking about my grandkids, I'm thinking about our neighborhood children. Here it is, and it's not changing. It's not changing. And some of the parents out there, they said, well, look, why is it when you have something for the Hispanic children and it's just the Hispanic parents that come, nobody is complaining about that, because they don't see us like within the same equity group, or and maybe it's because it's a language barrier. I just can't differentiate between the two.
But Ms. Madison,
yes.
That was part of what came up in that last meeting was, and maybe Dr. Keeling, I think you might have raised this last time, but or maybe Ms. Blefko did, but that was part of the conversation too. Is it's easier to tell a school, it's easier for some to accept help in outreach when there is a language barrier because it's so specific, versus saying, we don't have good communication with our, historically Black neighborhoods right now. So am I getting that right, Dr. Keeling?
Yeah, like you made a good point about it at that last meeting. You were like, it goes back to what we're saying, keeping race at the forefront. Sometimes it's easier to talk about language,
yes,
talk about African American and Black, or even to like talk about, indigenous, and even to say like Latino, and to just assume that all students who are Latino just have a speak Spanish, and there's a language gap when there are Latino parents who don't speak Spanish and there's still a gap, So yes, I think that's what we were getting at last time.
Okay, does anyone, we have some other topics on our agenda today. Is anyone wanting to share something before we move ahead? And I really appreciate all this frank discussion. And Ms. Madison, this is exactly why we have this space. So I'm so glad you shared some of your stories.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and I'm happy to share. But sometimes I feel like here she comes again. You know, after it's been over like 25 years or so doing this, the same thing. But I'm going to keep coming, and I hope that we can see some of these things come back and stay. And the parents that do come are listened to and they're heard. And this is one more thing I want to throw out there. It's a lot of things on social media that this board does not see or hear. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I tell you, it's just some things out there, and a lot of people express themselves better over the social media piece. But I don't know. But just thank you for the job that you're doing, and all I'm asking for is that it be consistent. And when you get something in and it's working, don't let some of the forces that are out there that don't want to see it happen, don't let them throw a wrench in it. That's all. That's all.
Good point.
Doyle, may I say one thing?
Yes, please do.
Ms. Madison, I just wanted to also thank you for your time this morning. I have heard you speak consistently in the several years that I've been on this board, and I just want to acknowledge your labor and acknowledge the gift that you continue to give our students in this district. And I just want to say I hear you, and I'm sorry that we aren't solving it faster or doing more, but I know we're committed, and I'm hearing you, and we will keep trying to take steps forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Doyle?
Yes.
Well, before Vicki leaves, this is Brenda. I wanted to say that I know that the program at Pathways and Central and such, those programs with minorities worked because our community trusts Vicki. Our community trusts the principal and the assistant principal at Central Elementary because we know them. And, there's a line from The Color Purple that all my life I had to fight. And that's what we do as Black people. We have to fight for everything. And we don't trust the people that you're sending out in certain arenas. So I believe that's important for you to keep that in mind. Dr. Felder will recall when she was hired, we talked about trust. That's what we were lacking, and that's what we need. We still need that. People will respond to Vicki Madison because they trust her. They're confident that she is going to do exactly what she is saying, and they have faith in that. Many of you know, seeing this, the signature line, I don't believe what you say because I see what you do. So we can say all day long that we're going to have equity groups and we're going to have trainings. But if you continue to treat people in a negative manner, you can expect us to not join these groups. And I say that because I'm a person of color and I continue to be, treated that way as well. And I know Vicki, because we're in the same sorority, the same thing happens to her as well.
Okay, and can I say one more thing? And then I know you all have to go, but just one more thing.
Please do.
Cedar Grove Community Center out there is a gym. I mean, I volunteered out there over the summer, and all those parents are dropping off all those children, and those minority parents are coming in there happy because they're dropping their children off, and it's a great place. So anytime anybody can, sometimes just go when COVID is over and everything, boy, go out and look, because boy, that right there is a niche, and that could reach some more of the children that are out there, because it's a safe, comfortable place. I'm done.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to pull up a different.
Carrie, can I just ask one quick question before you change subjects?
Yes.
and this is really for the Equity Task Force. And have you all identified specific measurable outcomes that we need to look at? And I would say at an individual school level that tell us where the problems are and how things are going and if we're making any progress.
So first, I want to thank Ms. Madison, because I don't know if she's going to stay on, but I do want to say it before she logs off, and thank all of the members of the task force, because I don't know if anyone else has to log off as well. Ms. Madison doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to ask her for help organizing like a grandparent program, because some retired teachers and just some older members of the community have a lot of knowledge about that history, and I would love to see them going into schools and like kind of being the grandparent for students. That's something that she's, I think, said that she was kind of doing on her own, and kind of following those students through. But anyway, that she doesn't know that yet. But to your point, Ms. Hauser, when we bring forth the district equity plan, again, this is all for the district. Each school has been asked to, through our equity leads, begin to identify where are the disparities within their school, because it may look different at every school, much like y'all are saying. What's happening at Central is not what's happening at Pathways, is not what's happening at Cameron Park, right? So I just, again, I'm not sure if everyone understands how massive the work is, because much like Ms. Bunner said, every school doesn't have like the equity leadership capacity to be able to identify where all the gaps are in their school. But within the plan, part of that work will be that the equity task force will help the schools, like we will be looking at data. So when schools identify, like, here are their goals, they'll be able to say, well, but your data says, like for AG, for example, that there's a gap here, but I don't see anywhere in your goals where you're addressing that. And so that's kind of the work that we're trying to get to. That's part of the process.
Okay. Can y'all see this screen? Are you all seeing my screen that says conversation?
No, it's black.
Oh, how do I, okay.
But while you're doing that, Ms. Stowe, I do have a comment. So, you know, we talk about needing to do action, and I just want to say, as you know, part of this, you know, this group, I think we need to move forward with the Minority Summit. I think our net recommendation needs to come to the board immediately, you know, based on the feedback of, you know, one board member that participated, and Ms. Madison and others. I think this is one thing we can do immediately that will, you know, start those conversations. And hearing that it was successful, I don't see a reason to wait or to not move that recommendation forward.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Is that, and I think we let's go ahead and do that. We don't have Ms. Moore, I think, at this point. So is that something that we bring to the board or the full board, or?
Yes, I make a motion to bring forward the Minority Summit as a recommendation for as soon as we can organize something in the appropriate environment we have.
Okay, that's I second that. Ms. McKenzie, are you wanting to comment?
Yeah, I'm hoping to just comment real quick. I'm definitely supportive of doing that. I'm hoping that Dr. Keeling and the Equity Task Force can guide us on whether calling it the Minority Summit would still be the preferred name for that event. So I think just taking a moment to pause about what we call it might be good, but I'll just throw that out there. Definitely supportive of the event when it's possible. I mean, maybe we can look towards having one in the fall, maybe sooner, but obviously it's difficult in COVID times. But
could I just throw one other thing in there really quickly with the summit?
Yes.
Beyond expectations. Is Charlene on?
She was able to listen in for an hour, and then she had other work she had to leave for.
Okay. because with that, with her group, that Beyond Expectations, with the Beyond Expectations group, that was the core of that, because she already had the children in place. She already had the parents in place, and it just worked. I mean, it just butted out and worked. So what we would have to do with that is get with a group that already has a core group in place and expand from that.
Vicki, I am on. I had to.
Oh, I'm sorry, Colleen.
Okay.
I just clicked back in and listened because I had to get out of my meeting. I'm
Okay,
out of my
remember,
meeting now.
Charlene?
Yeah, I just heard the tail end of what you guys just said.
Because we started with the minority summits, we started with Beyond Expectations. We started with your group, remember?
Yeah.
And then it budded from that, and it was huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what if our well, I'm just thinking, what if our recommendation is to go to bring this to the board so that we can vote to support the next step that is selected, since Dr. Keeling is talking about a grandparent event, that we can provide the support or for them to take forward that next step of a similar event.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I just don't want to use the 4-letter word of wait, right? Because it's clear to me, hearing the testaments of we're at the same place, I want to be more, assertive in getting things moving. So I'm very supportive of that, making sure that we do it the right way, but at the same time, making a plan and moving forward.
And it ties back to the.
Add one thing. Can I add one thought here?
Yes.
Well, it's a thought / question. The question is, I think I'm not clear what the purpose of the summit, if it's a one-time summit, would be. And I'm thinking about what Ms. Madison said about she keeps saying the same thing over and over and over again. And I'm cognizant of the precious time we ask of people and the limited trust we have. And I would hate for us to sort of, we're going to do a summit, get people together, and then nothing happens from it. So to me, it really seems like it has to be, there are two things. One is really purposeful about what the purpose is, what's going to happen afterwards, or is it an ongoing thing? And two, the other really valuable thing I heard from Ms. Campbell and Ms. Madison was, it sounds like it was very much led by Black families and responsive to what they wanted to do. And that feels really important to me, rather than the sort of like, the district is calling you together and then it's going to fizzle out on the other end. Something about what do families themselves want, need, what community do they want to create? I don't know. I worry about the board like really being sort of in the spirit of let's do something right now, doing something that doesn't sort of fit into a strategy for changing things and really changing those dynamics with families too.
Can I just make the recommendation, kind of going back to the task force recommendations?
Mm-hmm.
Some of the work of the board has to be to have conversations with families about what has been the role that the board has played in this trust gap. So you can, as a board, again, just want to jump to do something when you haven't taken the time to go in and have those conversations. That's the do. That's what's going to look like we're doing something. We can throw a summit and no one will show up because we haven't done that part of the work. So I just caution you to maybe go back to going into the communities, finding a way to talk to parents, helping them understand we're a new board, we have a new philosophy. Let's have some conversations. What would you like to see us as a board do and as a district do? That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, just for clarity, the Minority Summit process, and I think Ms. Madison provided some insight into some of the events that spun off it. But, and I heard a reference to Beyond Expectations. I heard a reference to the Cedar Grove Community Center. Again, Mount Bright and Mount Zion both have very strong educational support programs. And I just wondered if, to put it back to the community, and the Equity Task Force, if there might be some outreach through those channels. But I just want us to be supporting it and saying, we don't want to wait anymore, or unless they want to wait, and that's the problem, is that somehow it died, and I don't really understand why it died. And I know the schools had a big role in it, so.
Right. And Bonnie, I just want to, emphasize as well, I don't view this as a one and done. That's clearly what the problem has been. And I think us as a school district facilitating this, in means of where can it be had? We know all of these groups. How do we pull them together, have those conversations and say, we're looking to do this. What would that look like? How do we help you? Where would it physically be held at? Is it virtual and in person? Or, how do you go through all of these things? But if we just say, okay, we want our community to do it, it's just not going to happen. We're going to have to facilitate. And I agree with Sarah that I don't want to put a banner outside and say we're doing it and nobody shows up. That's just not going to be effective. It's going to have to be, to Dr. Keeling's point, conversations, outreach to these programs. And, I definitely heard loud and clear from Miss Madison, just being tired of trying to fight for everything. I think this is a place we can take a lead and help advocate and facilitate the conversations and help put this together. I don't think we should be the people deciding the content of the thing, but that's my thoughts.
Yeah, and if I may just add a few comments. So I do certainly agree that if not now, when, right? So and that based on what I'm gathering in my short time in the district, there is a lot of, someone's mic is on, I don't know who's, but there's a lot of historical background and such that we need to unpack. What I don't want to see us do is rush to remedies when we haven't gotten at the root cause. And so while the Minority Summit may have worked then, we don't know if it's going to work now and if that's what's needed. I think to Dr. Keeling's point and to Mrs. Smiley point, I think we have to first try to understand and be in a listening mode and hear from the people. We've started some of that work through reaching out to the faith-based community, and they were very insightful in that 1 hour meeting that we had with them, and are open to having additional meetings as a way in, because the Black and Brown community trusts their faith-based leaders. They trust the churches and the community organizations. It wasn't just faith-based, actually. We had representation from the Cedar Grove Community Center and other organizations and groups that are supporting Black and Latinx families. And so we thought that would be the place, because we've got tons of ideas and tons of remedies that we think through our lens will work, but we've got to pause and really hear from the people in terms of what is going to work best for them. But what I'm hearing from the board is a commitment to take action, a commitment to be of support, a commitment to do the work. And that's a great place to start as well.
Okay. So can we leave that at that point, Will, that we're going to bring to the board our desire to support this effort or similar effort as Dr. Keeling, the Equity Task Force feel is appropriate?
Yes, but I'd like to bound this somehow, right? Because I don't want to keep talking. I get we need to have the conversations, but at some point we have to say, we're going to take the first step, right? And I'm very supportive of us you know, doing some more thought on this, but I'd like us to set something up to say, hey, by, you know, by our next meeting or by the end of March, we want to have a plan on how we're going to do these engagements. I mean, we're the engagement committee, and it's not clear to me the path to get to that. I want to make sure we have a goal to get to that, I guess.
Okay. All right. Well, my other has to do with funding, which was another one of the items, was that we need to be supporting with our budget the work of the of Dr. Keeling's department. And I don't know if it would be appropriate to bring to the board that we want to support funding for an event such as this, or another one is the funding for someone like Ms. Giovannia Lewis to come in and do some of that work. So I don't know how quickly we want to move in that way, but I think someone was going to speak.
I was just going to offer, as I'm listening, this is Teresa. So, and I don't, my area of expertise is not how to word this to take this to the board for approval. So, but what I'm hearing is that there is a need to create affinity space to fully engage historically marginalized and silenced community stakeholders. I'm hearing both students, families, and the community. And so I'm wondering if the language is somewhere in that. And I also would like to offer that Ms. Madison, I lived in Orange County and remember when there was the pushback against that. And I think we need to call out and recognize, and this is where I think the board needs some language, that we are not going to allow the status quo and the dominant, this is how white supremacy lives out. We address a need in the Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, and there is a screaming for fairness and equality because there's a misunderstanding of equity, because equity is not equality, is not that we offer the same. So I think in whatever language and whatever we do, the board has to be willing to stand up and say that we are doing this because this is the right thing to do for those communities. We are going to create these affinity spaces to fully engage our students and our families. So that's just 2 cents to put in on.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Bunner. If we leave it, Dr. Keeling, do you have a request at this time of the board? Let's leave it with your request. How about it? Is there a request for an action that the board needs to take beyond the commitment to engagement at this point?
And I will let any members of the task force speak up. I think for me, I kind of already said what I would like to see. I would like to see the board going into the communities and trying to build those relationships and show the new direction that you all are going in. I don't fully know what the summit looked like since I just got here. So I have in my notes to like talk to Ms. Madison and Ms. Campbell for more information on what that summit looked like. But my thought would be, like I said, some more of the grassroots type stuff for the board, like going into smaller and building, but anyone else can speak to that.
Okay.
I'm thinking that the conversation has to be had. I mean, even if it's something where all of the African American community can come, and just like the board is talking to us here today in this community engagement committee, the conversation has to be had. They have to see your faces. They have to know what your plan is and what you're going to do, and you follow through with it. Because just having programs and trying to get people out, they need to hear from you. Now, that avenue and how that can be done, I mean, we know COVID is here. Just through this platform, it's not a good time, like for Zoom, for people, you know, that are going to work and all that kind of stuff. I don't know how it can be done, but it's the conversation. It's like Dr. Felder said, the conversation has to be had. And you know what? And it's almost like, and I hate to put it this way, almost like, man, we are, sorry that, this happened, and the trust, we know that it is not there. And, just be real. We are here. We want to hear what you have to say. That would be so important. We want to hear what you have to say. How can we, what would be the best platform for us to hear what you have to say? That's it. That's the thing, the platform. I don't know. But you understand what I'm saying? It's the conversation that has to be had before the program.
And if I could add, Ms. Madison, I think you are spot on. It is where the conversation is held. It's not come to us. This is not, I have conversations with some members of the Black and Brown. They're not coming to, we've got to go to where they are. Where are they? They're at the community center. They're in the faith, at their churches, in their houses of worship. They're in the organizations that they trust and that they have built relationships with. So we can build and have a meeting and say, come. The listen and learns were evident of that. The intentions were great. There were very few people of color at those meetings. And when I asked why, they told me why. We're not coming to that. They don't trust me, haven't built a relationship with me, and they certainly are not trusting the district who they have a history with. So I just say that the intentions are all good, but I would recommend that we've got to get at this in a way that is really going to unearth what the root causes are, allow people to have voice, and do it in a way and in a space that they're comfortable with, where they do have a trusting relationship. So the how is just as important as the what and the when.
Yeah, I would, if I so agree that Efland is always left out of the conversation. So I just want to make sure they're not, because that's a whole different Black and Brown community. But also in this conversation about the affinity group, the minority summits, and how we do this, that we really are talking about the Black community. We're not talking about the Hispanic community, because they work differently. And so we really need to have separate conversations, because it's always like the white context, Black and Brown, but the Hispanic, completely different way of relating and interacting and engaging. And I think we need to have that conversation separately.
Okay, if I may, I'd like to share this other, it's sort of a similar topic, and then I know we have some staff to hear from, and I know Mr. Atherton has some information to present as well. But if I can, I'd like to just spend a few minutes touching on some feedback I got. Ms. Blefko and I met with the PTA Council President from Chapel Hill Carborough City Schools, who's Riza Jenkins, and their board member, Dion Temney, regarding better outreach that we could do with our Karen and Burmese refugee community. We've discussed here that our refugee community is relatively new compared to the Chapel Hill area. It's centralized also up in Efland Cedar Grove. Ms. Blefko's worked really hard providing interpretation for our new Parent Academy series. And she shared she had a contract in process with Refugee Community Partnerships. And Ms. Blefko, please feel free to jump in if you have things to add. The Parent Academy is currently in English and Spanish with interpretation in Burmese. And she also talked about developing translation help for flyers. And that's another area where we've tried to find a family liaison with those language skills. One of the challenges she shared that was echoed by people in the Chapel Hill Carborough City Schools is that when our our documents, our school documents are so technical and academic, translation is difficult. And so that there's this ongoing need to lower the English language before we translate it to make it more understandable. And there was another need for affinity groups. In the Chapel Hill Carver City Schools, the Karen and Burmese refugee community has grown over the past 20 or so years. There've been a lot of efforts of outreach, which I'm happy to share articles from the News and Observer, and that they've also partnered with the Family Success Alliance to work on translation. With a similar theme to what we're discussing here, Dion Temney was sharing how important it was for him to maintain the outreach in the community that he did as just a regular citizen before he was elected as a board member. So he's really worked to maintain that level of outreach. And one technique he uses is after events or flyers or communications, he has people he reaches out to see how that communication was received. He talked about honoring holidays and cultural celebrations through noting them on our school calendar. And to that end, I'd like to share the Corinne community celebrates the New Year on January 13th this year, which is next Wednesday. And he also talked about volunteering in that community where he has the chance. And one of those opportunities is at Transplanting Traditions Farm. And I think this is a topic we might talk about at a later meeting as well. But in terms of farm and garden space in our community. But that particular farm that is used to provide the refugee community places to grow their the familiar plants and vegetables that they're used to having in their home country that they're not finding here as readily. And then also as a business opportunity, they've been able to operate a CSA at the farmers markets down there in Chapel Hill and Carborough. So it's been this really great collaboration, and they also have youth programs there. And then we also heard from the PTA Council President, Risa Jenkins down there. Some of her outreach has also been grassroots. She talked about there's a really active Baha'i outreach group that it sounds a little bit similar to what we're hearing about the Cedar Grove Community Center, but they do camps, they do cultural events for youth, they help families with rides, and just it's been a real effort to build trust over time. There had been a Saturday school for Corinne families that also was shut down, and I think there was a cost for that. And then back to this familiar topic of exclusivity of groups such as the PTA, and so sought to help there be more diversity on the school improvement teams and the PTAs. There was one PTA that met exclusively at a country club, and so they've done things such as had their school improvement team applications and information translated into multiple languages, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, and Korean. There's, again, this history of white parents taking over the group, and also conversation around developing parent affinity groups. Ms. Blefko, did I leave anything out? Are there any other key points you'd like to share from that conversation?
Yes, well, I just want to make a point about the translation. Just sometimes the language of some other families say that is way high, but when you're doing a translation, legally, you have to translate word by word, just like it. But I mean, we probably can do a message, and I'm using WhatsApp with some of our Latino groups that we have in these schools, like Cameron Park, New Elementary, and Stand Back in Cedar Ridge. And our goal is to expand that to the other schools. We are starting just doing affinity sessions within Stanford, and we're gonna be continuing doing those. And this month we're gonna do one with Stanford and with Ray D.A. Brown And the activity sessions are called Pláticas Familiares, all used by chats or for families and in Spanish. And this is used for our Latino families, just because of the language. And when we have our African American family liaison, for we can do an affinity space for African American, and we have one that is Korean Burmese. We have one for Korean Burmese families as well. And yes, we talk about also probably to collaborate. This we Scarborough and Orange County. We are Orange County, so probably events they can benefit of the schools. We can probably collaborate. Recall anything else?
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have comments about this topic before we keep going? Okay. I just felt like it was similar themes, and I wanted to touch in on that. I know we have Ms. Cobb is going to share with us an update from the Student Safety Task Force, and Dr. Keeling has more to share from the Equity Task Force, and Mr. Atherton has some things to share with work he's been doing, and hopefully have time for a fellowship update from Ms. Stowe. So would we like to take a few-minute break before we proceed with some of the staff updates?
I'm good to keep going. And Carrie, I'm also willing to table my stuff because, you know, I definitely would like to hear the updates on this, you know, from the other agenda items as well.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm good to keep going. Ms. Cobb, would you, is she on the call right now? And stop screen sharing. Let's see.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Okay.
So I am sharing a brief update for the discipline committee. We are still working on the name. Our meeting has been rescheduled. It will be next week, but we did have our first meeting. We are delving into the data, and the data that we'll be sharing next week will be discipline data in comparison, keeping in mind that 2019-20 year will be a little different because it's not the complete year. The data stops in March when we went into, when we had to stop coming to school. So the data comparison will look a little different because it stops in March and there's not that extended time. And we also will be completing and or finalizing our charge statement for that committee. That committee is made up of district staff as well as our sheriff's office, the sheriff himself, and then 2 other representatives that are supervising our SROs at this time. Are there any questions?
Would you, do you foresee with the meeting that you have coming up, when would you like to, when do you think that they'll share with our committee, or I know that sometimes you put things in board updates too. So what are you foreseeing?
Yes.
Something.
So I'm trying to plan that meeting for Wednesday or Thursday, and I would be able to share in the board update on that Friday following.
That work. Does anyone have any questions for Ms. Cobb? Okay.
So I maybe have one question. So given the COVID environment, do we know, I mean, is part of this going to be discussing how discipline's handled right now as well? And in the engagement of that?
I'm not sure that I understand. So I think I'll try to see if I'm understanding you correctly. So right now, if a student has a virtual discipline concern, then the administrator does deal with that according to the virtual discipline consequences that we set up, right? And that is, still pulling them in, doing conferences with the student, the student support services team, contacting parents and following up with them, trying as best we can to deal with the situation without having to remove the student from the virtual program. But because we are virtual, even if they are not allowed to attend that class, they are still able to do work on their computer or what have you. I think I'm answering what you're asking a
Yeah,
little bit.
absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
The only other part I had on that is when y'all present the data, are you going to be able to distinguish between, hey, this data is from, virtual, and this data is from, regular session school, or is it going to just be mixed and,
Yes. So we should be able to do that because any virtual discipline happened between March and June. So all of that data would be a little different than the August to March data because that would have been in-person data.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Those are great questions. Thank you, Ms. Cobb. Anybody else for Ms. Cobb questions about the task force? Okay. So we also would like to hear more from the task force and then Ms. Stowe from the Flamboyan Fellowship update. So who would like to go first? What works better for y'all?
Ms. Stowe can go first.
Okay.
Thank you, Dina. So good morning, everyone. Nice to see you and appreciate the conversation that we've been having. So we do, as the board is aware, Orange County has a team that was accepted into cohort 3 of the Flamboyan Foundation. They got a lot of information on their website. I'll put a link in the board weekly update just so you can peruse that. And this is we have 6-member team. So I'm on that team in addition to Stan Farrington, Dr. Emily Elstad, who was referenced earlier, and she's our parent rep, Dr. Dawson, Sandra Blefko, Dr. Keeling, and I mentioned myself. So the 6 of us are on this team. And just what's most exciting is their whole premise is family engagement and the intentionality of family engagement. And so why family engagement? Well, it's simple. Students do better when families and schools partner. That's why we have to engage families, because our students do better. And I've worked specifically in family engagement for 18 years. In fact, back then it was called parent engagement. It was parent, now it's family. And I guess I could say I've worked in it 24 years because when I taught and was administrator, you see the importance. And so what's exciting about this foundation is that this is all that they do, family engagement. And Dr. Felder referenced a meeting that we had with our faith-based community. We also had representation from Cedar Grove Community Center, the Orange County Housing Development, and North Carolina Cooperative Extension. And what we wanted to do was to learn, what can we do? How do we work together? And so our team had a call with the foundation. We meet monthly and we focus nothing but family engagement. And this is a 2-year commitment. And so I told them we're having this meeting, and they said, well, where's your agenda? So I share it with them. And it's somewhat similar to the things we've talked about this morning. And they said, whoa. Your first question has to be about trust. You can't start with what you want to do. You've got to listen, and not just listen, but they have to be heard. And it honestly changed the entire dynamic of the meeting. And that's all we talked about. And we will meet monthly. They did ask for some information, and they're going to get that. And so it's bigger than listening and hearing. We have to commit to what we say. We have to be accountable. And then we have to pay attention to the results. And part of the Flamboyan Foundation is that we will complete a project. And we have no idea what that is, because the first 3 to 6 months is us interviewing members of the Orange County community, internal with schools, external with our community, and listening. We don't know what we're going to do until we know what they want us to do. And so when I hear, Dina and I work very closely together. I know she referenced being a department of one. I've been a department of one before. It's hard, it's heavy lifting. And really the work of Dina and communication, family engagement is all the same. So we work together all the time. And I know we've done a good job, still working on it with language representation. And we share that with the foundation, Flamboyan Foundation. But the two areas that we really need to look at and are looking at are representation and cultural visibility. And those are heavier lifts. And I want to elaborate too, Sandra mentioned earlier, referenced an issue with language interpretation for Karen and Burmese. We have 46 Karen and Burmese students, and we don't have anyone that's employed by us. So we have to outsource that. And when you outsource, you're limited to their hours and their availability. And so that, just wanted to go back, that was the issue. When it's us, we're always available. We can make it work out. But when we have to depend on someone outside of Orange County schools, it can make it harder. So we've already taken care of that. But anyway, so the foundation is really about being intentional, and so it's not about the events and the what are we doing. It's about listening and being heard, and that's where we're at right now. And it's a really great time too. And I'll let Dr. Keeling elaborate. But she is working on a strategic plan, which the board will see, specific to equity. And part of that is we want to jump to goals. We want to jump to what we did. But it goes back to trust. Trust is the bottom, is essential in everything. And so before we can talk about what we're going to do, we have to listen, let people be heard, and develop those relationships. So her plan is phase one. The work we're doing with the foundation, we're in phase one. A lot of the work that we're doing in community engagement is phase one. And Dr. Keeling, I'll pass to you if you want to add anything that I've missed on that. But it really is really exciting work, and we will have updates in your board weekly update as we have things to report.
I definitely don't want to take over this meeting. I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I want to make sure everybody else has a chance to talk. But no, just to piggyback on that last comment that Ms. Stowe made, I don't want to give everything that's in the equity plan away. I just want us to I want to give people sneak peeks of it. But one of the goals, and Ms. Stowe and I were talking, we were like, okay, so we're going to do this, this, and this. And it was like, wait, we can't even do that until we first just identify where are those gaps in communication, where are those gaps in authentic engagement. And so like Ms. Stowe said, we will be doing this landscape analysis, and we will be working with the equity task force to look at all the different conversations that we're having, like with the faith-based community and the students and with families, so that we can put a plan together. But we cannot get to that until we first, much like we just keep saying, identify and have the conversations and just listen. And then when we do put something together, we have to bring that back to the faith-based community, to those stakeholders, and say, is this what you meant for us to do? We just can't say this is what we're going to do. And they're like, again, you didn't listen, and that's not even what we wanted. So that's the process that the Flamboyan Fellowship is taking us through. And that's the process that will be in the equity plan. And that will be the work of the equity task force, so that by the end of this school year, we will have that landscape and that plan in place, where we would have gotten feedback and shared it back with them so that they can tell us if we're heading in the right direction.
That's excellent. And it really goes along with the other parts of the conversation we're having this morning. Does anyone have questions for Dr. Keeling and Ms. Stowe?
I have a quick one, and that's the Family Success Alliance. Have we invited Family Success Alliance navigators to be part of these conversations?
So we've been having conversations. Our family liaisons, Ms. Bluff and myself, meet with them monthly. And so they will be embedded in this foundation and this project and part of the interviews that we have to conduct.
But they don't have a seat at the planning table or the decision-making table. I think there's a way to elevate them.
Right. So the foundation actually only accepted, you could only have 5 people on the team, and we asked for an exception. So there's no one else at the team, meaning those monthly meetings, but because of those monthly meetings, we have to have additional meetings and do the work. So they are part of that. And if anyone else knows of other folks, even Ms. Doyle, she was part of our interview process because, with her being the chair of the subcommittee. So if anyone has ideas, we're certainly open to those. And as we start doing interviews, we will be asking you and letting you know who we're meeting with, because we don't want to miss anyone.
Great. Other comments?
Hi, Ms. Doyle. I just wanted to share that I know that, first of all, thank you to Melanie and Dina for helping to lead this work and the partnership with the Flamboyan Foundation. And so what was described, I know may sound like it's slow, right? And oh gosh, we just want to get to the doing, but sometimes you've got to go slow to go fast. And what they, I believe, are going to unearth through this process of listening and interviewing and getting to the root cause is actually going to serve as an accelerant that will help us to accelerate the work and do the work right and be doing the right thing based on what we've heard through this process. So I just wanted to emphasize that again, that it may feel like it's slow, but it's actually going to allow us to go fast.
Right. I like that they identify tape analysis. I mean, having that as a separate stage is really important. Any other comments? Okay, we look forward to updates as they come about. And Dr. Keeling,
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't not let this go. But the other piece I just want to say on the accountability, that at the end of whatever we decide and whatever we do with the foundation and with anything else, it has to equate to student achievement. So if it's a big elaborate event, at the end, it has to equate to students achieving. So it's not about so much the event, it's the process and the outcome. So it's always about student achievement. It's always about students reading and their achievement in the classroom. So it's bigger. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Right, good point. We have to see those outcomes. Okay, Dr. Keeling, I'm going to pass it back to you, and you can lead us through the other part of the Equity Task Force conversation that you had.
Sure. Can you project again for me? Is that possible? I appreciate your help.
Yes. Should I go back to that same document?
Yes, if you scroll down to, I think maybe the 3rd slide is where it starts.
Okay, sorry, it's just taking me a second because I'm having to find. Oh, here it is.
Okay, I'll start talking so that people feel like we're still moving. We wanted to, the Equity Task Force wanted to present to the board. We had some conversations around what are the next steps for the task force? You know, as we said, we're in this process of writing this equity plan. You know, we've written this policy, we've hired an equity officer. So the work is evolving. It's starting to roll, it's starting to take off. So what is the next step for the equity task force? So you can advance to the next slide. So in one of the first meetings for the community engagement subcommittee, there was some conversation around the equity task force serving as kind of a model for some additional task forces that may be created by the board and through this committee. And so what I did was I wanted to really have an understanding of what is the role of a task force. And so I did some research on task forces at the K-12 level. So I looked at different districts across the country and looked at their different task force, not necessarily just equity, just across the board, looked at higher education and their task force. And then I looked outside of education and just for different organizations who have a task force. And so what I did was kind of did this analysis of what were some features of each of these different task forces, where were the commonalities? And this is what I found. And so I say this first part for the board to kind of think about as we're creating task forces and what is this model of a task force, to kind of have this framework of what across the board task forces do and what they look like. So task forces are created for an on-needed basis, and they're created usually because there's some event that has occurred and the board wants to get some more information about how to best respond to that event or how to respond to similar events. And so much like you all, when you created the task force for COVID, right? Here is this unexpected event. We need some information. We're going to need some input on how to move forward. They are typically comprised of some experts in the specified area of practice, and some of that expertise may be that is people who are directly affected. And so, you know, that's my expertise, it's my experience. They accomplish a specific objective and charge, and then they're given whatever it is that they need in order to accomplish that charge. And with that charge, the task force is under the authority of the board, and they can only do what the board has charged them with doing. The task force itself cannot create new tasks for itself or new charges for itself. It is the purpose is to take whatever the board said, do that work, and then to that next point, they are a working group. They come with some deliverable that they give back to the board that speaks to whatever it was that they are charged with. And then the last part of a task force is that there's an end date to them. There is an expectation that the board will disband, that the group will disband when the objective has been completed. They continue to go on. Again, much like your COVID, 3 years from now, 2 years from now, prayerfully, there is no COVID. We won't continue to have a COVID task force because we have an end date to that. So you can go to the next one. Thank you, Ms. Doyle. The other thing that I found was that for across the board for these organizations that have a task force, there was some document that speaks to each of those points. They didn't all have the same document, but it was a document where the board said, here's what this task force is charged with. And the task force themselves can fill in what are the tasks that they're going to do to get to that charge. The board and the task force work together to decide what are the deliverables, what is it that you're going to bring back to the board. The board sets the duration and says, here's the end date. This is the amount of time that you have to accomplish this charge. It talks about who the task force reports to. In some cases, it's to the superintendent. Sometimes it's to the board chair or the committee chair, who will lead that task force. And usually if it was a board member that led it, there was someone in the district that co-led it, and who appoints the members of the task force. The board is appointing people to be on the task force. The district is recommending people to be on this task force. And then finally, the composition. So at the end, before the task force itself even gets started, there is very clear guidelines as to what this task force is going to do, what is expected of them, who is on there, and how long this is going to take. It's not a process that the task force is created and then they're trying to figure this all out ahead of time. So one of the recommendations would be that as we move forward with a task force, again, this is what the Equity Task Force is kind of working on, if they are as the model, that this would be the framework that is put in place ahead of time before a task force is created. You can move to the next one. So the next thing I did was to go back to the Equity Task Force and to kind of do this comparison of here's what task forces do. Was the Equity Task Force accomplishing and doing what a task force has set out to do? And so the Equity Task Force was created in response to the Confederate flag and some other racial issues that were occurring in the district. And the board needed some more knowledge about how do we move forward? How do we address these issues? And there were some experts that were on. So when we talk about like a Dr. Glacier who has done this research in equity in education, and then there were also experts in that lived experience. So we look at like a Miss Madison who has a wealth of knowledge. So that's what the members of the task force were. The charge was to open a community dialogue on issues of race and areas of improving equity in schools. Now, I found that charge going through all of the board minutes that related to equity. Like I did a search on this Equity Task Force, and this is what came out. I held individual meetings with our own Equity Task Force before COVID started and asked them, when this was created, what was your charge? Where do you see it going? What role do you want it to play? And that kind of became the data that I used as we decided on the next steps. And so what some of the task force members said was that we were never really given a charge. So when I said this, they were like, that wasn't really what was said to us. It was kind of like, here's what the problem is, or here's what we're seeing. We're going to pull some people together and they're just going to tell us what to do. The next was providing the support to get the work done. And they were given training, they were given data, they were given access to district staff. The product that they were to bring back, the deliverable, again, I went through all the board meeting minutes to see what is it that they were told to come back with. And they were told to create a draft equity policy. And they were told to advise on the rewrite of the student code of conduct. And then finally, in terms of like an end date or the expectation around that, they were initially told that they were to, the commitment was for 3 months. And they were then told that the commitment was for 6 months. And then they were told that the commitment was for a year. And so there wasn't ahead of time told to them, like, here's what your commitment is. Initially, they thought this was about a 3 to 6 month project that they were going to be working on. So you can move to the next one. So at this time, in speaking with the Equity Task Force, the recommendation is that we create an OCS Equity Advisory Board. So as I said, that commitment was initially told that it was going to be 3 months. And in speaking to each of the members of the task force, they have stated, we're tired. And some people have come off the committee and have told me, I just can't do this anymore. Like, this has gone beyond, this is 3 years later and we're still here, right? So I cannot express enough the gratitude that I have for the task force. And I tell them that every time we meet, and I will say it to anyone who asks me. The relationship has really evolved. It has really gone from me trying to have this understanding of what is this task force? How do I best use this task force? How do we get this work done? To really them being like advisors for me personally. when we talk about me being a department of one, and that I don't really have anyone that I can bounce ideas off of and say, am I heading in the right direction here? This is what happened. Like, just being that place for me to have those conversations, be that sounding board, and for them to give me that advice back, like, that is just invaluable. And so although they are looking to rotate off, I have asked them to continue to be this group for me who I can touch base with. And they've all agreed to that. And when I say rotate off, what they are looking to do now is to take like the work that we're talking about doing in this equity plan and start doing that work. So some have said, like, I would like to work more with students. Some have said, I would like to work more with teachers. Some have said, I would like to work more with parents and community. And so that's exactly what we want to see, right? We want to see that when people come onto the task force and it's time for them to rotate off, that they don't just disappear into the darkness somewhere, that they have taken that experience and said, wow, I have realized that I'm very interested in this aspect of equity. And so I would like to be a part of this and to do this work. And so that's kind of where we are. Equity is this ongoing process. It is not something with an end date. It is something that requires a formalized long-term plan. So if you will move to the next slide. So the recommendation from the Equity Task Force is to create this Equity Advisory Board. And unlike the task force initially, where members were kind of selected by members of the board and the superintendents, and the public wasn't aware of how members were selected, this advisory board would have an application process that is widely advertised, a very open process, so that people are well aware, how do we get on, how people are selected, very transparent process. The members would be comprised of all stakeholders. And so Mr. Atherton brought up earlier, like, how are the students going to be a part of this? And this is where the students come in. We're going to have members of the community. We're going to have members of various community organizations. We talked about FSA, they come up a lot. We can have members of FSA who can be a part of the advisory board, our families, district level staff, school level staff, teachers, from teachers to bus drivers, cafeteria, maintenance, whoever wants to be on this team will have the ability to apply to come and be a part. And then, as we said, students. This advisory board has bylaws, and so it is clearly defined what the expectations are. So it is not the case that people come in and are trying to figure it out as they go. They will know ahead of time that this is how long our commitment is. I understand that I rotate off. I understand these are the responsibilities and the duties. I understand trainings that I have to go through. All of that is front loaded for people so that they are aware. This advisory board, one of the things that was discussed is that the task force was created because there was no chief equity officer. There was no equity department. There was no equity policy. And so now we have those things in place. And so we no longer need this entity that is kind of taking direction from the board. What do we need to do next? We now have this entity that can move under the district, under the superintendent, under the equity department, and the chief equity officer. And then, as we said, within the policy, it says that this is an ongoing, equity itself is ongoing work. And the work of the board is to be, the equity advisory board is to be ongoing. And so removing it as a task force shows that it is enduring and that it has no fixed endpoint. And it keeps us compliant with our board policy. And then next one. And so here are the responsibilities of the Equity Advisory Board. They will continue to advise and make recommendations to the board and superintendent. So much like we saw take place today, that will continue to be the trend. They will continue to, in the fall, come with the recommendations and advise, like when you all have like the gender support policy, can you kick that back to the equity advisory board and get their feedback? All of that continues to be in place. They will engage in ongoing training. And so this is the same process that we talked about building that equity leadership capacity. And so they will be getting ongoing training of how to lead a district through equity, as well as just making sure that they always have knowledge of what are the current trends as it relates to equity, and what is equity looking like for us. We take this trend and we see what does it mean to Orange County schools. They will assist in the development of the equity plan. So they are going to examine data, both the test scores and the quantitative data, as well as the qualitative data. Everything that we've discussed today, having these listen and learns with the community, with the students as well. They will take all of that and they will ensure that the goals, the equity goals that the schools create, as well as our departments that they create, as well as our overall district plan, that they're actually speaking to the data. So equity is not about just doing things that feel good and that you like to do. Like Ms. Stowe said, we are trying to change outcomes. We are trying to change narratives. And so they're going to assist with that process, providing us guidance to make sure that the actions that we are saying that we're going to do are moving us closer to changing the outcomes and achieving the outcomes that we would like to achieve. They're going to monitor progress. We talk about having that accountability. That's another thing that came up a lot today. Like, we want to make sure that we're not still having the same conversation 2 years from now. And so when we create goals, each of our goals has a timeline and a way that we're going to monitor progress. And the Equity Task Force, one of their responsibilities will be to keep going back to the plan to see, now, what were we supposed to have do coming up? And so departments will come back and have conversations with the advisory board and to say, you know, here's where we are with that. And they're just monitoring to make sure that we're moving forward. They'll also be monitoring, as was said earlier, the recommendations. Is the board moving forward with their recommendations and just keeping us accountable? That's the biggest part there. And then this last responsibility will be around this culture of equity. That's one of the goals within the equity plan, is still working to create this culture of equity. And that means we have to have these community dialogues about equity. I think some of the need for, or the desire for the task force to have open meetings was for people to hear what was being said. And by moving it into the department or into the district, it will not require us to have open meetings when we're doing these trainings and having these conversations. But what we're going to do is begin to have these community forums where we are talking to the community about issues of race and equity and kind of educating the community around those, informing the public about our equity initiatives and our progress towards the equity goals, giving the stakeholders a chance to ask questions about it and to provide input and feedback. All of that is part of our equity planning process. So when we have these community dialogues, that's another way for us to collect data, because we're asking the community, what do you want to see? But it's also a way for us to have conversations and tell the community, and these are the things that we're already doing. I think to end, I will just say that when I was first hired, I told members of the board that I sensed that the process of getting to the equity policy and the hiring of a chief equity officer opened some wounds and created some wounds. And so for me, the vision of this equity advisory board and this interaction with the community and them really taking the lead in helping us to create this culture of equity is our way of saying that the next steps for equity in this district is to work towards some collective healing and us coming together and doing this work together. So the last slide, Ms. Doyle, just kind of sums it up. I think Dr. Dawson said it best when we were having these conversations with the equity task force: sustainability, ownership, accountability. That's what this advisory board will do. It is ongoing work, and it is a process that we will put in place so that regardless of who is leading equity in the district, this is how the community says equity endures. We will not let equity not happen in Orange County schools. And that's where that ownership also comes in, because we are working closely with the community and they will hold us accountable, again, so that Ms. Madison doesn't have to keep saying we're not making the progress that we need to be making. So that's all that I have. I am open to any questions that the board has.
Thank you so much, Dr. Keeling, for that labor. And so this would transform the equity task force, which you discussed having, which has sort of an end, or theoretically should have an end, into the advisory board. It does address the problem we talked about with the need for private conversation at times, but then it would also create some of these community forums that we were saying elsewhere in the meeting that we really need. So that sounds great. So who has questions for Dr. Keeling? Please just speak up.
I have one. This is Brenda. I have a question. You mentioned qualifications for these members. Who determine the qualifications and what are they? And I'll tell you why I'm bringing that up, because a qualification to be a board member is not that stringent. So I'm just you know what I mean? So it's real hard for me to think the qualifications to sit on the advisory board would be more intense than the qualification to be on the school board, because all we had to do is pay $5 and, well, anyway. So what are the qualifications?
Great, thank you, Ms. Stevens. I don't recall saying qualifications. I hope I did not, because that is not it at all. There's an application, but there is not qualifications.
Okay.
Yes, the only thing that we're asking is for people to, on the application, it will say like, what is your knowledge of equity? What is something you've already done towards equity? So that we are making sure we still want this advisory board to be people who are committed to equity, not just who are trying to collect information and put it on social media, right? That's not at all what we want. We want this to help us continue to move forward. So there is no qualification. It is just that commitment. And we would like to see people who have already done some work around it, right? Like that have already taken some trainings and have some knowledge of it. But that's not necessarily going to be the requirement. If people are strongly committed to the work and are saying, I want to learn more, that's why I want to be, then we're open to that as well. Like we need those people as well.
All right, thank you. Because yeah, I did hear the word qualification at one point and I wrote it down quickly, because then I thought, wait a minute, you can't have those qualifications more stringent than that of a board member, because ours are, the bar is low.
Just one thought to add to what Ms. Stevens is saying is I agree that those formal trainings are important, and I'm sure this is on your mind, Dr. Keeling, but just need to say it out loud. Like we have community members who have just really deep experience in these schools, right? But haven't done those trainings, and that's really important too. So I know that's on your mind. I just needed to say that. And we might even want to give people a different way to submit. Like maybe you shouldn't have to write a whole bunch. Like maybe if you want to submit, you do a little video on your phone answering the question, you know, just multiple ways of people to be able to respond potentially.
I wrote that down. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of simple points. First of all, I'm hypersensitive to boards and committees overpowering the voices of community. And actually one of the communities I think that really, whose voice we don't have the most trouble with is our teachers, by the way. But we have lots of voices that don't get heard, and task forces tend to overpower them. So I am concerned about that. And in particular, would this advisory board work with our equity liaisons in schools, and how would schools be represented on it?
Right, so one is through that application process, any staff member can be a part of this advisory board. It's not limited to principals, or it's not even limited to teachers. It's any staff members can apply. Equity Equity Advisory Board, it's not a hierarchy, but as the schools develop their plans, which is done through their school-based equity teams and their equity leads, that information is brought back to the Equity Advisory Board. And so like the equity leads would be having some joint meetings with the Equity Advisory Board. We already did that at the beginning of the year to kind of set the stage for that. So those equity leads and their equity, school-based equity teams, they work with the schools. They collect information and here's what's going on in our schools. Here are the questions that are being asked. And they can bring this back to the advisory board to say, so what are some next steps? How do we address some of these issues that we're finding going on in our schools? So that's the connection, that this is not a board that is like seen as power. This is like not what it is. That's why we pull it away from like the board, because we said those conversations of the board is kind of seen as power and people get quiet around the board. That's not at all what this advisory board is. It's quite the opposite. It's bring these things to us so that we can address them.
And if I could add one more question, is there a tie between the equity plans and the school improvement plans?
That's a great question. I don't know if Dr. Felder or Dr. Dawson is on to speak to the school improvement planning process.
So currently, no. The school improvement plan is not connected to the equity plan. The equity plans were added just this school year after the school improvement plans. So that is something that we will need to work on in terms of how to combine them.
Actually, I was actually thinking that too a little bit, Bonnie, in terms of talking with the people in Durham Public Schools and Chapel Hill Carver City Schools. I felt like there was more weight. As a parent in Orange County Schools, I was unaware of the voice or opportunity provided by the school improvement team. And I don't know if we emphasize them as much in Orange County Schools as the other schools. Like, I don't know what we do similarly and differently, but I'm thinking about the fact, Dr. Keeling, that, you know, parents have an opportunity. Do parents have an opportunity to be on the school-based equity team? You know, I'm just sort of thinking of opportunities for community members. And how does it tie in that we have school-based equity teams and we also have school improvement teams? I mean, I realize they're separate, but what opportunities do those separately provide for voices to be heard?
So it's my understanding that there are parents on the school improvement teams in schools. Some of the conversations that I've been having with Dr. Dawson and Mr. Johnson, who are over schools and school improvement and working with the principals, and we'll be working on their school improvement plan, is how do we, for next year, because for this year, what the school equity teams and the equity leads are doing is really impactful because they're really laying this foundation. Again, I can't be everywhere to make sure that the work is getting done in the schools. But to get to that point of, is there a way, or do we need to fuse these together? Does the school improvement team become like the equity team? Like, what is that process going to look like? If they need to remain separate, how do we ensure that parents are on there? How do we ensure that students are on there? And in talking to some of the schools, I think they do have it open that it's not just teachers that can be on there, but it's still a process. We're still trying to bring this all together in this midst of COVID, and people still trying to understand what does it mean to lead with equity. So for next steps, that is the conversations that we're talking about. How do we bring this all together?
Great, thank you. Okay, other questions for Dr. Keeling? We have about 20 minutes left. This is our last presentation from staff members, and we already talked about whatever board members have outstanding, which is Will mainly. Thanks, Will. But yeah, so please go ahead with your questions.
All right, so just a couple of questions, Dr. Keeling. I really appreciate you looking at this as we needed to evolve this, and completely agree, go into an advisory board. Similarly, the application and bylaws, even though we had a task force, you kind of put some of that together before and had very specific things about attendance and, how you wanted to pull in representation. For the advisory board, are you evolving that as well? Will we get a chance to see kind of what the thoughts are around that and how that's going to be put together? Because, I want to make sure, as a board member, I understand how we're doing that and be able to talk to the community and encourage people to participate. But I know you did a lot of work on there. It was, lots of this and that and working with the task force before. But just curious, is that how you're approaching is evolving that or scrapping it and starting over or?
Oh no, Mr. Atherton, we're not going to start over. No.
I'm glad to hear that, first of all.
No. So the plan is to, once the board approves moving forward with this equity advisory board, to take the application, to take the bylaws, and now as a equity task force, which remains in place for the rest of this year as we're developing this process for the equity advisory board, to look at the bylaws and make sure that there aren't any changes or to make any necessary changes, as well as the application process, make whatever necessary changes need to be made now that we have this equity advisory board. But we're not going to start from scratch. We're going to take what we have and just see, do we need to tweak it in any way?
That's great to hear. Just a minor process item is that we will need to update policy 1030 to reflect advisory. I mean, minor, but just from a standpoint of how do we, get it to that final state, we'll need that. And I know Hillary's on, so we will need, to do that as well.
We can bring that to the next policy committee meeting.
Excellent. Thanks, Hillary.
Yep.
I just so you know, I'm always about superstructure, and if in a perfect world, I would love the goal of this board to be to incorporate equity into the operating systems of the district. And to me, that starts with the school improvement plan. So technically, Dina, I think you should work your way out of a job, is the truth, because equity is built in everywhere. But before we create additional equity as an additional responsibility, I would like equity, because then as a board member, we can stop asking, where's the equity piece? Because stuff comes to us and it doesn't have the equity piece and it's frustrating. So is it possible to create as a priority to get equity built into the school improvement plans, to get equity built into our reporting systems, because it ain't there now.
So I'll let Dr. Felder talk first if she wants to talk to the school improvement plan part of it.
Well, while she's coming, I agree with Bonnie that, all departments and all schools should function equitably.
Yeah.
And if we do, we won't need all of these boards and committees and groups if we all function equitably. But
yes, absolutely agree with what you said, Ms. Hauser and Mrs. Stevens. And so again, that is the ultimate goal, is to bring both together. However, the school improvement planning process had already started when the idea of needing equity plans. We didn't want to wait another year. And so the equity teams at each school, working with their administrator, were leveraged to develop an equity plan that should relate to their school improvement plan, because no one needs to, be serving two different sets of goals. And so, but again, it's going to take time, right? And so this is where we started this year. Next year, the goal is to bring them together. And so that's our ultimate goal. But we didn't want to lose an opportunity this year to not do that. And I think it's been a beneficial. I don't know, Dina, if you want to speak to that feedback from the equity teams, the plans are very impressive in terms of what they're focused on. In fact, it's not just schools. Every department is required to have an equity plan. And Dina is working with every department in this district to establish an equity plan. So this is our first stab at it this year. And the goal is to, again, do more work around how do we bring this all together and get better over time.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, that I don't think you ever want to work yourself to the point that you don't need making sure that equity, that there's accountability and that it's being overseen. You get to the point where you start removing parts of like, oh, we don't need this group or that group. And we have such turnover. You have new staff that comes in, you have new boards that come in. You want to make sure you have entities that are ensuring that regardless of how things change, we're still keeping equity. Yes, you definitely have to be where every school understands it and is doing the work, every teacher, every department. But you should never want to have the goal of, let's get rid of, we shouldn't need this stuff because it's just going to happen. It's that has to be overseen. It's something that is so easily pushed to the back that you don't want it to be that's even what you want to make it look like. So
Ms. Doyle, thank you. I turned on my camera to chime in and say the exact same thing. And I'm not trying to be confrontational. And Bonnie, I understand your point of, in an ideal world, things are functioning equitably, so you don't need a department overseeing it. But I think we have to be really careful what we say publicly. And I mean, in a country that is founded on the principles that it was founded on, in a school district that has had the grand dragon of the KKK be the chair of the school board at one point in the past, we are so far away from that point, and our scores are so far away from that point that even suggesting that just kind of, I just had a visceral reaction to, and I needed to say that. So that's all.
Well, let me give you the other side of that before, since I made a lot of money making departments go away, and not because they were not, quote, important at one time, but because they interfered with the mission with the work. Because departments tend to take on, and I'm not commenting that equity should go away, please, but just understand that I just, in all our conversations today, and in, there's been very little conversation about individual schools and equity issues facing individual schools and what has to happen to make a difference. So I am always worried as a priority about what happens at our schools, because that's where the work happens and that's where the action, that's what change happens.
I think that that's fair, and you and I can take this conversation, offline if we need to, but I think that I feel the exact opposite. I think if we have an equity department that is constantly interfering, we're damn lucky, because we need oversight. And I just want to be really clear as a board member that that's what I want and hope for. And I think that if we're lucky, we're not working our equity department away, that we're working to double, triple, quadruple it, because we need it so badly in this district. So that's all. We can talk later if you want to hash it out more, but that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I just want to, we are getting close to the end of the hour, and it reminds me, thinking of the bridge, and I don't know if this is practical, Dr. Felder and Dr. Keeling, but the message from the Parents of African American Children group, that I'm just intrigued by the whole advocacy arm. And, I was a PTA officer and I didn't even know we were supposed to have an advocacy arm, which is pretty sad. But, if there were like having an advocacy seat at the school improvement team table, or, whether that's related to PTA and work from a group like PAC or some other way, I think it seems like there should be some sort of voice there at that table. And I'm sure you're considering those things. I'm repeating something that Dr. Keeling and Dr. Felder are already thinking about, but I just would really love to see that in our schools. We are approaching the end. Does anyone have any comments before I kind of just wrap up with what's on the plate for next month? this was an excellent conversation today, and I think it's important that it bubbles up in the ways that it did, because we just need room and space for this open dialogue. And so I think it was a really healthy conversation today, and I appreciate everyone being here, especially the Equity Task Force members. So next month, so Mr. Atherton had continued to pursue some conversations around SNAC with Chapel Hill, and I think also Durham Public Schools. Is that right, Will?
Yes, I did.
So we will start with that next month. And another item that Dr. Felder, I don't know if you know, I don't think that I haven't seen Dr. Dawson on today, but we had a mention in November that Dr. Dawson and Ms. Braxton will be doing a presentation sometime this winter, spring on CTE, and Mr. Atherton was going to start us off on with like a background presentation. So we'll either have him go next month, even if Dr. Dawson and Ms. Braxton aren't till the next month, but that's one of the items coming up soon.
Do you have a preference?
Do you?
Well, it may be beneficial to show what we had done before, and then, you know, Ms. Braxton and Dawson come in and talk about some of the things we've been able to accomplish, you know, versus backwards, because I think it would help bridge, because there's a lot of things in there and we know there's a lot of work to do. And, you know, Ms. Braxton has done a phenomenal job, you know, moving us forward. So that would be my preference, is just to show what came out of that, and then maybe bridge some of those with the update.
Okay, so are we thinking Dr. Dawson and Ms. Braxton in March? And okay, just want to be clear. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And also, Ms. Stevens, we talked a little bit offline about the live conversation in the new year. What month are you thinking that you'd like to begin that?
Well, whenever you say, I've already made a contact, and I have an activity plan, and it's in line with the recommendations that I heard this morning of the ongoing conversations with community. And that's exactly what we're going to do. There's a community group that I'm a part of, I'm an officer in, and we would like for the school board or cabinet or district to join us when we have our poet laureate do a virtual program, and we're going to discuss poems. And I think that would be a good opportunity for us to, you know, have conversations with the community and create friendships. Vicki Madison is a part of that group. Well, it's my sorority, and you know, so that means it's all Black. So, you know, hopefully that you'd get an opportunity to meet and talk to professional people in the community as well. But it's up to you. It's going to be, she's scheduled to do this virtual program for us at the end of February, and I could send you a flyer if you'd be interested. But I was told that I could extend the invitation to this group, because, you know, Jackie is one of our own.
That would be excellent. So we could be invited to join you in February, and then that might kick off something that we do with the library maybe afterwards in March. Is that
right? But this was the first thing, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity, because what we're going to do in February, this virtual program, is to discuss some of Jackie's poems. Anybody can, you know, we can read poems and talk about it with Jackie.
That's excellent. So we will save space on the Community Engagement Committee for February to hear more about that. And look forward to that. Thank you, Brenda.
Sure.
Okay, and there's one other topic that Dr. Keeling and I discussed. Do you want to mention that, Dr. Keeling, regarding Ms. Stewart?
Sure, this is really quick. It's just an idea that I had some conversations with Ms. Kara Stewart, who is like a literacy coach at one of our schools, and she is also a member of the Sapani tribe. And outside of the work that she does here in Orange County Schools, she does a lot of work doing like professional development around helping people to know more about the Native American tribes, particularly the ones from this area. And so I just mentioned to Ms. Doyle that maybe the committee would like to partner with her and offer like a community information type of forum where she's talking about the tribes. I think it would go towards, again, building that culture of equity. And I think it also shows like the community engagement committee, like their role in that. So that was just an idea that I had.
Something I'm also thinking about, like weather and COVID. So if we're hearing from Ms. Stevens and starting that piece in February, which maybe there will be follow up with a more collaboration with the library in March. Would you want to hear about this with Ms. Stewart, and would you want to discuss it at like a March meeting, and then it might be an event in April where maybe something could be outdoors or in public? Or I don't want to push it back in the year, but I wondered if that might work better.
Sure, I think it's completely up to the committee how you want to proceed. I don't know that, you want to try to do it in February, right? Like, I don't think it's enough for that. So I think if you want to move it towards the spring and hopefully COVID is moving out some, fine. Well, totally take your direction on it.
How does that sound to you, Mr. Atherton?
It sounds good. I think it's a way that we should be engaging and getting a broader view.
Okay, so if we kind of have a conversation with Dr. Keeling with that at our March meeting and invite Ms. Stewart if she is able or wants to participate in the March meeting, or send us information before the March meeting if she's not able to participate, and then we'll kind of tentatively have more of an event, community event, maybe in April or spring. Okay, that's great. So does anyone else have any closing comments or things they want to bring to the committee?
Well, the only one I have is, I know Hillary's still on, and we were looking at getting board members involved into more of the committees. And I know she had sent out an email to ask, do we know where we are with that, or did we get interest from the board?
Let me, I'll send out an email this afternoon.
Okay, that's great. I know we had sent it and just wanted to make sure we can engage board members if somebody signed up. So
yeah, I think it was two commit. I just want to. I need to go back and review it. I don't want to say the wrong information here, but I will let you know this afternoon.
It's okay. We've all had an influx of email.
It's been kind of a busy year, Thank you for reminding me. I'll send it today.
All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Hillary. And also another item that just to follow. So we do have our virtual office hours established. I sent that information out to the whole. Our first one, we're rotating through alphabetically. So Will and I are doing the first one, which is January 16th from 9 to 11. Ms. Stowe, did you see that? Is there anything more we need to do to get the, we talked about making sure we post that early so that if someone needs to request translation services, there's adequate time to get a translator. Is Ms. Stowe still on?
Yes. Yes, I did receive that, and I don't need anything, and have worked with Ms. Blefko on that.
Okay, great. So is there anything more that we need? Do you want, can I follow up with you afterwards?
Sure.
Okay.
If you and I can share the links with you if individual board members want to share that.
Is this something, when we were public to encourage people to come and speak up?
Yes, so we're going to have it posted on like the school. Our agreement was to post it in one place on the school website, the district website, and then people are welcome, make it shareable so people can share it wherever they want. But that we're not going to try to identify where it needs to be shared, because we don't want to be inequitable and where, different Facebook groups we're aware of, not aware of. So it's going to be posted on the school district website. I think it's just going to mention board members and not name people individually necessarily, because there may be people who swap. I'll need to follow up with conversation with other board members if you want to have, if our goal is to always have it like the second Saturday or something, or if the team that's kind of doing the given month wants to pick the Saturday that works for them, which is fine. I just I just want to make sure we don't lose track of when it is and that we post it in time. So I can follow up by email if we run out of time here. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you again, everyone, for being here. I think we covered some good material, and there's always more to cover, and I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thanks again, everybody.
All right, thanks, everybody. Bye.